Today's readings flood us with call stories, Isaiah's, Paul's, Simon Peter's. If they share a common theme, it's simply that the person who feels called felt they were not worthy. Isaiah says, "Woe is me, I am lost." Paul says he's the least of the apostles. And Simon Peter fell to his knees and begged when Jesus called him. So stories of callings take us back to our first principles. What's our story based on? Why are we here? And what makes us come back week after week, month after month? When I ask people what they think the central Christian message is, you get some odd responses. You get a few no ideas. But you might sort of get things like, love your neighbour and do to others as you would have them do to you. And that's fine. That's great. But it's not really the Christian message, is it? The central message, because that's gospel. Good news. Love your neighbour and do to others as they would have you do to you is good advice. It's not good news. So we need to think about what's good news. Good news isn't about something that we do. It's about what God does for us, saving us from the power of sin through the death of his son, Jesus, on the cross. And we have to trust in that. We have to trust in Jesus. And that's what those first disciples model for us. That Jesus doesn't give them good advice. He tells people not to be afraid and to trust in him. And the way Luke tells the story this morning has real resonance for us as we seek to be Christians in a complicated and complex world. Jesus has been teaching the crowd from an empty boat. This boat was the place of employment for Simon Peter and his brothers and his colleagues. So it's rather a bit like Jesus using an empty conference hall of a tech company or a storage unit out of hours. This was not his turf, so to speak. He's a carpenter, not a fisherman. This is not his employment. It's not his particular skill set. Yet Jesus comes to this workplace and says to the professionals, you're doing this wrong. Put into deep water, he says. Let down your nets for a catch. And Simon Peter, being the sort of impetuous, outspoken sort of man we know, could have responded in all sorts of ways to this, mostly unrepeatable from a pulpit. He does make a small protest. Master, we have been trying. It's not like we've been slacking. It's been an all-nighter, but the fish just haven't been there. But then with remarkable grace, he says, but because you ask, I'll try again. Now, what would happen if Jesus walked in through the door, that favourite thing? What if Jesus walked in right now and said to us, lovely people, you're getting this all wrong. Or perhaps more gently, he stepped inside and told us that we needed to go catch fish on the other side or in a different location. What would it mean if he told us to redefine our vision for what it meant to follow him? Now, I really, really, really hope we wouldn't be stubborn and say, but we've always fished like this. We've always used the Green Hymn Book. I gather you've been singing the same setting for 38 years. Just saying. There might be that part of us that's going, it's not our fault. It's not our fault there aren't more people here this morning to appreciate this. We work very hard to maintain our buildings, our worship patterns, our traditions. We don't want to change and do things differently. Just because church attendance isn't quite what it used to be, and we've got 2 children here today. Hallelujah. Well done. But we're not packed out, are we, with the under 5s, Would we have the grace to say, Sure, we've been working on this really hard. But because you say so, we'll do something differently. And Jesus was willing, wasn't he, to go into that deeper water and challenge the fishermen to keep trying. And Jesus met them where they were, but he didn't leave them where they were. He had a greater calling for Peter, James, and John than to keep wearing themselves out, doing the same things with little results. But note, Jesus didn't ask them to stop being fishermen. He didn't ask them to stop fishing. He doesn't expect them to be anything more than themselves, fishermen. He's not asking them to become soldiers or carpenters. He says, be yourselves, but try again in a different way. So Jesus isn't saying, abandon church, give up being who you are. He asks us to be church in perhaps a new way, to go into the deep waters, not the safe shallows where we like paddling about most of the time, but into the potentially scary places. And when Simon Peter and his friends do what Jesus asks them, they have a wonderful, miraculous and overwhelming catch of fish. And their understanding of being professional fishermen is knocked on its head by this non-professional carpenter Messiah. Because the danger is, isn't it, that we think we're good at doing church. Vicars tend to think they're quite good at doing church. But we run the same risk that Simon Peter was in, of turning away from the voice of Jesus, which says, try over here. Even when over here, we believe will be unproductive, deep water, and not somewhere we want to go. But they dare to try. Of course, Peter gets it wrong to start with, telling Jesus to go away because he's sinful. I fondly imagine this was the first time of many that Jesus both wanted to shake Peter and hug him simultaneously. Because, Jesus knows that it's fear. It's fear that prompts Peter to speak as he does, lack of self-belief. But he says, don't be afraid. You can change your way of being a fisherman. So we need to be honest, don't we, about our current position. Master, we worked all night and we haven't caught anything. We've got to be honest about that. Then we've got to be open and generous in our response to Jesus. Because you say so, I will let down the nets again. And we've got to hear those words. Don't be afraid. Because we've got to trust in our calling to be your church. And so we'll keep trying. Do we have that trust in Jesus and in each other to take these steps? And if we don't, what do we need to do to develop that? What one thing could you do that builds the trust we need? It might be really simple. It might be about rebuilding a relationship. It might be saying hello to somebody you haven't actually spoken to for a while. It might be offering yourself to read the lesson or lead our prayers, knowing that even if you make a mistake, this is a church where that is okay because we trust each other. And when we build the trust, then we can respond to Jesus' words. Don't be afraid. And if we were to have a response that knocks us off our feet, please let's remember that everything we do is not about us, but actually down to the saving love of God in Jesus Christ. So Jesus doesn't give up, neither should we. We've got to be willing to keep putting out our nets, even after nights of frustration and empty boats, because we trust the command of Jesus, who knows the riches that we will find in those deep and unexpected waters. And we may even find locked churches with a note saying, "Gone fishing." Amen.